this one. This is the microphone that I want to do, but I don't know if it's doing anything because you won't tell me anymore that this is possible. You can hear me now? Oh my god. All right. Well, okay. 15 minutes later, let me turn off the lights and we'll start this. Hang on. All right. Well, I still don't know what happened to this stupid, lovely, wonderful microphone. Because apparently now we just need this. But we can still read this way. Okay. Let me restart that. All right. Tamora Pierce, Circle of Magic. First book, Sandry's book. Got a fantastic little map going on here, which will mean absolutely nothing to you until I read a little bit more. Chapter 1. In the Palace of Black Swans, Zakden, capital of Hatar. Blue eyes wide, Lady Sandraline Fatoran watched her nearly empty oil lamp. Her small mouth quivered as the flame at the end of the wick danced and shrank, throwing grim shadows on the barrels of food and water that shared her prison. When that flame was gone, she would be without light in this windowless storeroom. "I'll go crazy," she said flatly. "When they come to rescue me, I'll be raving mad." She refused to admit that, with this room locked from the outside and hidden by magic, a rescue was hopeless. "I'll draw the mob away from here, far away," Piercy had whispered through the keyhole, speaking in her native trader talk. "You'll be safe until the smallpox has run its course. Then I'll return for you." But her nurse had never returned. Right outside the door, the mob had caught and killed her because she was a hated traitor. Trader. With Piercy dead, no one would even know where Sandry had spent her last days. Her light wobbled and shrank. "If only I could catch it in something," she cried. "Like trader wizards catch the wind in their nets." "A net is string," she interrupted herself, "and string is thread." She had thread in the work basket she had grabbed when Piercy dragged her from her room. The basket's contents had kept her from giving up completely before this, as she embroidered until her eyes refused to focus. She had thread aplenty, in coils and in her work. "No mage," she argued, resting her head on one hand. "I'm just a girl. A noble girl, worse yet. Like that maid said, good for nothin' not to be waited on and to marry. Good for naught, that's me." Tears filled her eyes, making the lamp flame quiver even more. "Crying won't help," she snapped. "I have to do something. Something besides weep and talk to myself." She dragged her work basket over. Fumbling, she yanked out 3 coils of silk, one green, one pale gray, one bright red. Swiftly she arranged them, one in her lap, one to her left, one to her right. The light was down to a blue core and its wavering orange skirt. Gathering the ends of the threads in her left hand, she pulled them together in a knot, tying it as snugly as she could. Finding long dressmaker's pins in her basket, she pinned the knot to a barrel to anchor it. Her fingers shook, sweat crawled down her face. She didn't want to think of what would happen if this didn't work. Worse, there was no reason for it to work. Piercy, the traitor and servant, had magic. Lady Sandraline Fatoran was good only to be waited on and to marry. "Nothing to lose," she said, and took a deep breath. "Nothing at all." Aboard the trader ships, their mimanders, mages, called to the winds as if they were friends who could be invited to stay. Come on, she told the dying flame. Come here, won't you? You'll last in these threads longer than you will in that lamp. That lamp guttered. The flame was gobbling the last few drops of oil that remained in its bowl. The girl started her braid. The green thread wrapped around her fingers like a strangling vine. The gray slithered to the floor like a snake. The red tangled with itself. Uveni, patience. It is everything, Piercy had often told Sandry. Without patience, magic would be undiscovered. In rushing everything, we would never hear its whisper inside. Uveni, Sandry whispered in trader talk. She straightened the threads, one on each side, one in her lap. Closing her eyes, she found that she was much calmer when she couldn't see her work or the lamp. She didn't really need to see to do something as easy as a braid. In her mind, her threads gleamed brightly. They called specks of light from all around her and tangled them in their strands. The flickering lamp went out. She opened her eyes. The wick was dead and black. Through and around her braid, light shone steadily, filling the room with a soft, pearly glow. Did I know I could do that? She whispered. The braid light wavered. All right, she said, gathering the threads once more. But I have to sleep, you know. She wiped her eyes on her sleeve. With a whispered, Uvumi, Sandrine Fatoran went back to work. That's why I have 3 dozen braided bookmarks all tucked into the rest of my Tamora Pierce books. Yeah. New location, in the southeastern pebbled sea. When she sat up and looked at herself, Daja thought she was a ghost. Her skin was all sparkly white. Had an enemy Mamander turned her from a brown trader into a white one? Why on earth would anyone do such a thing? She ran her swollen tongue over cracked lips, tasted salt, and grimaced at her own foolishness. This was no Mamander's doing. This is what happened when a sea-soaked girl went to sleep and didn't wake until the sun was high overhead. She brushed herself off, salt flakes dropping onto her makeshift raft. White grains got into her many cuts and scrapes, where they burned like fire. Her family ship was gone, sunk in a storm that their Mamander could not stop or get rid of. The trader god, Koma, known for peculiar acts, had chosen Dalja to be the only one left alive, floating on a square wooden hatch cover. All around her lay a spreading pool of wreckage. She saw tangles of ropes and lumber, shattered crates, smears of color that were precious dyes from their cargo. Bodies also drifted there, the silent remains of her family. Daja's lips trembled. How long would it be until she joined them? Should she jump into the water now and end it? Drowning was quicker than starvation. Something thumped nearby. An open leather chest slammed against a mast. Again it thumped against the wood as water swelled, then flattened beneath it. She could just glimpse its contents, some bundles and dark glass bottles. It was what traders called a soraku, a survival box. They were kept everywhere on the ships. She had to get it, and she prayed that its contents weren't soaked or ruined. Daja reached out. The box was beyond her grasp. She looked around for a long piece of wood to grab it, with no luck. Water surged in another slow roll, and her raft moved away from the wreckage. The box stayed behind. No! She cried. No! She strained to grab that precious thing, though yards now lay between her and it. Come here! Come on! I order you! She half laughed, half cried to hear such foolishness. Come on, she whispered, as she had when she coaxed the ship's dogs to come to their food bowls. Come on. She was not very old, after all. She did not want to die. Tears rolling down her cheeks, she reached down and twitched her fingers as if she were beckoning to her pets. Later, she would wonder if she had just imagined it, being crazy with the sun and terrified of death. Now she stared, jaw dropping, as the box pulled away from the mast and floated toward her. It stopped twice along the way. Both times she wiggled her fingers, afraid to move anything else. Both times the box came forward until it bumped her hand. Very, very carefully, she drew her prize onto the hatch cover. It was indeed a suraku, lined with copper to keep the damp out and the life in. The bundles were oiled cloth to keep their contents dry. The corks in the bottles had wax seals. Gently she felt through everything and grabbed a bottle. It took nearly all her strength to wiggle the cork out. When it popped free, liquid sprayed onto her face. Fresh water. Greedily, she drank most of that bottle before she came to her senses. If she guzzled it all now, there would be less for tomorrow. She had to save it. She fumbled to put the cork back in. Inspecting the other bottles, she saw they also held water. Thank you, Trader Korma, she whispered to the god of deals and rewards. In the bundles, she found cheese, bread, apples. She ate carefully in tiny bites as her lips cracked open and bled. All thought of the future vanished, for right now she was gloriously alive. The suraku lasted for 3 days, and might have kept her for 2 more if she ate less than ever. In all that time she saw no sign of ships. It was still early in the trading season. Captains more cautious than her mother were still in port. Knowing her food was nearly gone, she tried to strike a deal with Koma and his wife, bookkeeper Odie. I don't look like much now, she told them, her voice only a thin croak. But I'm a better deal than you think. I'm strong. I know most seamen's knots, except maybe the pin sheep shank, but I'll work on that. She bit her lip. She didn't dare cry. It would mean losing water with none to replace it. Far away, so far that it didn't seem real, she heard the crack of canvas. Was it a dream? Slowly she turned her head. She was in the trench of a swell. All she could see were the peaks of water on either side. Her nostrils flared. The wind blew as the trench she was in rose and flattened. New smells drifted into her nose. Breathing deep, she recognized the dull odor of brass riding on the back of the deep, rusty tang of iron. Metal meant people, didn't it? Metal, except for the bands on her raft and in the box at her side, went straight to the bottom without a ship to hold it up. Ahoy! A man's voice sounded over the water. Ahoy, are you alive? Yes, Daja cried. She kept a hand on her beautiful suraku. The other she stretched as high as she dared and waved carefully. If she fell in now, she was far too weak to swim. She lost track of time. It seemed like forever until she heard the splash of oars and saw a longboat come alongside. In its bow sat a lean white man. His large dark eyes were set deep under thick brows and a heavy fringe of black lashes. He wore long silver and black hair tied back. A trader to the bone, she noted that his yellow shirt and gray breeches were linen and well made, not a sailor's usual cheap wool. Hello there, he said as casually as if they'd met in the marketplace. My name is Nico. Nick Lauren, Goldeye. I've been looking for you. I'm sorry not to have found you sooner. As sailors gutted the boat closer, he reached for Daja and pulled her into the boat. Someone held a flask of water to her lips. Wait, she cried, voice rasping as she fought to sit up. My box. There. She pointed. Please, save it. The sailors looked at Nico, who nodded. Only when they had brought the chest into the box and stowed it next to her did she relax and drink their water. New location. In Hajra, port city of Sotat. I did channel that a little bit, didn't I? My apologies. In Hajra, port city of Sotat. Hang on, let me grab my water. Where's my water? There's my water. We're going to have Grumpy Pride-Plus for a little bit longer as we recover from like 15 minutes of silent microphone, but I would go grab the Terry, except if you can see very carefully, Catullus is curled up with his head nestled just against Terry on the floor over there. Terry being the purple picket corn. Doesn't want to be in his bed, which is right here. He wants to be curled up on the floor, cuddling Terry. Aww. The first time the Hajran street guard caught Roach with a hand on someone else's purse, they tattooed an X on the web of skin between his right thumb and forefinger, then tossed him into a big holding cell overnight. Nursing his sore hand, Roach went straight to the far edge of the chamber, where a watery beam of sunshine reached down from an opening in the wall. Patches of cushiony moss grew there. Sitting on the floor, Roach found that one of them... Stop! Shut up! I know it's 8 o'clock. Shh! Sorry, my alarm went off. Roach found that one of them made a fine pillow. Months later, a shopkeeper grabbed Roach as the boy helped himself to a few scarves. The Hajran street guard took him, tattooed an X on the web of his left hand, and tossed him into the same holding cell. The moss had grown to cover most of a corner. It made a soft couch where he could sleep and wait to be released in the morning. Roach's current visit was his third. The guard had nabbed his entire gang of street rats in a jeweler's shop. Most of them already had 2 X tattoos, which meant they got no third release from justice. All of them were thrown into the great holding cell. His moss now covered the entire corner and a good amount of floor as well. It was the most comfortable bed that he'd ever had, with room left over for the rest of his gangmates to use it for a pillow. As others scrambled for a share of the slop the guard called supper, Roach whispered to his moss. "Won't be back," he explained. "Third time's cursed. I'll get the mines, or galleys, or shipyards. Unless I break out, it's for life." He smiled faintly. Life was a short thing now. No one lived more than 2 years in those places, and escapes were rare. For all that, he slept well. When he woke, it was judging day in Hajra. "Weevil!" brayed a guard at the door. Roach's gangmates sat up. "Dancer! Alley cat! Viper! Slug!" Roach hissed angrily. It was Slug that got 'em all in this fix, watching them steal instead of looking out for street guards. "Cheater! Turtle! Roach!" Roach hesitated. Should he make them come get him? A guard cracked a whip, looking at him. Roach decided to avoid the beating he'd get if the man had to drag him. With 2 X's on his hands, he'd receive plenty of beatings in the future as it was. "Thank you," he told the moss, and joined the rest of his gang. They were quick-marched past other cells, then up a long flight of stairs. On the level floors, the guard began to trot, urging the captives along with their whips. Roach was gasping when they were driven into a huge, echoing chamber. A woman in the gray robes of a magistrate sat behind a long table. People in street clothes stood in back of her. Clerks sat at each end of the table, scribbling as guards and civilians testified against criminals. Roach ignored the testimony that concerned his gang. These grand folk had already judged him, so why listen to their cackle? When the testimony was done, a clerk called out, "Weevil!" The gang leader was shoved up in front of the judge. "Hands!" he ordered. The guard slammed Weevil's hands down on the table, holding them so the X-shaped tattoos were visible. Like Roach, Weevil had 2 of them. "Mines," the judge said. The guard shoved Weevil into a wooden holding pen at the rear of the chamber. Roach shut out the rest as the law officers worked their way through the gang. Instead, he thought of those plants in the cell, how peacefully green the moss showed when even a little bit of sun touched it. Give him a green like that from a living plant over the light that danced in emeralds. That was a hard color. The moss glow was soft. The plant didn't seem to need much earth to grow in, though it liked water. He'd given it part of his water ration when no one was looking. He didn't mind being good to growing things, but he did object when others made fun of him for doing it. Twin pairs of rough hands picked him up, then dropped him in front of the magistrate's table, jarring his ankles. He growled and fought as the guards dragged his hands out in front of him. He knew it was useless, but he didn't care. They'd remember him, at least. The judge didn't look at his face, only his hands. "Docks," she said, and yawned. They were dragging Roach to a separate pen from the one that held Weevil and Viper, when a light male voice said, "A moment." It was not a request, but a command. The guards looked back, but Roach did not. "May I see the boy again?" the man inquired. "Bring him." The judge sounded bored. Roach was hauled back to the stand in front of the civilian. This was no lawyer or soldier. His long, loose overrobe was of a deep blue dyed cloth that cost a silver penny the yard at Draper's Lane. It was worn over loose gray breeches, a pale gray shirt, and good boots. Carried only a dagger. It hung next to the purse on his belt. This was a money bag then, or an officer. Somebody big for certain. Somebody who wore power like a cloak. The bag whispered to the judge, who made a face. He held something before her eyes, a letter with a beribboned seal on it. The judge glared at Roach, but nodded, and the bag stepped away from her. "Their majesties are inclined to mercy, as you are but a youth." The judge rattled it off fast, a speech learned by heart. "You have a choice, the docks, or exile from Sotat and service at the—" She faltered. The bag bent down to whisper, long gray-streaked black hair tumbling forward to hide his face. Roach wondered if he was looking for a cute little servant boy, and grinned. Men who liked play toys always regretted meeting him. The man straightened and looked around until his dark eyes caught and held Roach's gray-green ones. There was something in that black gaze, something that had nothing to do with human play toys. Roach's sense of power held in check grew threefold when he met those eyes. They warned and comforted at the same time. Roach looked down. "You have a choice of the docks or apprenticeship to the Winding Circle Temple in Emelon," the judge went on, "until you take formal vows at the temple or until its governing council rules that you are fit to enter society. Temple or docks, boy. Choose." Choose? There were guards on the docks, nasty, wary fellows. A temple could hang on to a smart street rat like him. Better yet, Emelin was far to the north of Sotat. Fresh territory where nobody knew who he was. "Temple," he replied. "Make out transfer papers," the judge told a clerk. Master Niclarin," this was to the blue-robed man, "will you take charge of him?" "Of course." For a moment, Roach's heart raced. He might be able to run before he ever saw Emelon. Then he met the bag's eyes and gave up that idea. The man, Master Niclarin, looked too wise to fall for any dodge that he might pull. "I can't make out papers for a roach," whined the clerk. "Not to a temple." "This is a chance, lad." Niclarin's voice was light in tone for a man's. "You can pick a name, one that's yours alone. You can choose how you will be seen from now on." Only as long as I stay, Roach thought. Still, the bag was right. Roach had never liked his name, but no one argued when the title was no one argued with the title the thief lord gave. "Choose, boy, and hurry up," snapped the judge. "I've other cases besides yours." The docks were too close to risk annoying these people. What name would temple folk like? Plant and animal names, that was it. He imagined robed men and women smiling at him and giving up the key to the temple gate. Plant and animal names. Picture flashed into his mind. A green velvet corner. But that wouldn't do. He needed a tough name, one that would tell folk he was not to be trifled with. He studied his hands, trying to think, and noticed scarred welts across his right palm, a souvenir of a vine that grew on a merchant's garden wall. "What's them vines with needles on them? Big, sharp ones that rip chunks out of you when they grab 'em?" The bag smiled. "Roses. Briars." He liked that sound of that second one. "Briar, then." "You need a last name," the clerk said, rolling his eyes. "Last name?" wondered Roach. "Whatever for?" The judge tapped the desk impatiently. "Moss," he said. No one would think he was moss soft if he just didn't use it. Briar moss, said the clerk, and filled in the blank space on his paper. Master Nico, I'll need your signature. Briar frowned. Master was a word for professors, judges, and wizards. The temple called women and men dedicate. Was his men, anyway. Cut him loose, said the bag. Master Nick Lauren, or ordered the guards. Your pardon, sir, but you don't know what he's like, growled one of them. He's born and bred to vice. Nick Lauren straightened and caught the man with those black, powerful eyes. Are these marks addressed to me? Roach shivered. Was the room suddenly colder? The judge drew a circle of protection on the front of her robe. The guard's face went white as milk. His partner cut Roach free. Briar won't run, will you, lad? Nick Lauren bent to sign the clerk's paper. Briar, Roach, sensed that the bag was right. Something about this man made escape seem like a bad idea. I'll stick till we get to this temple place, he told himself. I can get lost there easy. Nico! I know. I love him so much. I read somewhere for one of her characters, I read somewhere that Tamora Pierce was kind of had the image of Jeff Goldblum in her head, and I can't remember if it was this one or somebody else, but like I kind of love that. So, at least for me right now, I kind of imagine Jeff Goldblum with a mustache in my head. I should do tongue twisters before I do this. Vocal warm up. In the city of Nineveh in caption. Fourth location, last one. In the darkness of the temple dormitory, when she was trying to cry herself to sleep with the least amount of noise, Tristana Chandler heard voices. It wasn't the first time that she'd done so, but these voices were different. This time she could identify the speakers. They sounded exactly like the girls who shared the dormitory with her. I heard her very own parents brought her here, dropped her off, and said they never wanted to see her again. Tris was sure about that one. It was the girl in bed on her right, the one who had tried to shove ahead of her in the line for the dining hall. Tris had raised a fuss, and a delegate had sent the girl to the back of the line. I heard they passed her from relative to relative until there weren't any who wanted her anymore. Tris yanked at one of the coppery curls that had jumped out of her nighttime braid. She was fairly certain about this speaker, too. The girl whose bed was across the room and two more beds on her left. She had tried to copy Tris's answers to a mathematics question just that morning. The moment Tris had realized what was going on, she had covered her slate. She despised people who copied. Have you seen her clothes? Those ugly dresses. That black wool so old it's turning brown. And they strain at the seams. Fat as she is, you'd think she'd eat more at the table. She wasn't completely sure about the last speakers, but did it matter? The voices seemed to come from every bed in the dormitory to cut at her like razors. Why did they do this, the ones she'd never even spoken to? Because it felt good to be mean with no one to see and blame them? Because it felt good to sneer as the group did? Go after the targets that their leaders pointed out? Her cousins were the same. They followed those who loved to make fun of the outcast among them like ducklings chasing after their mother. When her parents had given her to the delicate superior stone circle, she had thought she'd run out of hurt feelings. Seemed that she hadn't after all. Tris clenched her hands in the sheets. Leave me alone, she thought, speechless with fury and shame. I never did anything to most of you. You don't even know most of you. No one knows that the wind had picked up, jerking at the shutters in the windows and making them clack against their fittings. I bet her parents tried to sell her to traders. Maybe, but even traders wouldn't take her. They wouldn't think she has value. Everyone found this hilarious. One of the shutters hadn't been securely locked. It burst open, letting in a swirl of cold wind. The girls nearest to it screamed and jumped to close it. A gust of wind bowled them onto their rumps before it whipped around the room, pulling covers off beds, scouring belongings off the small shelves. By the time it roared out of the room, all of the girls but Tris were screaming. Two delegates, their habits thrown on over their nightgowns, rushed into the room carrying lamps. Everywhere they looked, there was a chaos of girls, bedding, knickknacks, except at Triss's bed. It was untouched. The girl on it stared at them with tear-reddened, defiant eyes behind the brass-rimmed spectacles that she had just finished jamming onto her long nose. Next morning, after breakfast, they brought her down to the office of Stone Circle's Delegate Superior and left her in the waiting room. Beside her, they placed her few bags, completely packed. She had not said a word. There was no point in it, and by now she knew how stupid it was to try to talk to someone who was determined to try to get rid of her. As she waited, staring fixedly at those battered leather satchels, she realized that the honored delegate's door was not quite closed. I know that you're already on your way to Winding Circle, and I need you to take this girl with you. Is it such a hard request to grant, Master Nico? Send her later in the spring when the trade caravans leave for Emelon. The light, crisp male voice sounded annoyed. I'm on a very special task these days. If I have to change my plans suddenly, this child will only get in my way. We can't keep her. Her parents swore that she was tested for magic and found to have none, but the delicate superior's voice trailed off. Briskly she continued, I don't know if she's possessed by a spirit or part elemental or carrying a ghost to be at the center of such an uproar, and I don't care. Winding Circle is far better equipped to handle a case like hers. They have the learning and delegates who are more open-minded with regard to unique cases. They have the best mages south of your own university. They will know what to do with her. Hearing all this, Triss felt sick. Spirit elemental or ghost burdened, was she? What kind of fate awaited her? Some people learned to manage such creatures within themselves. Others got rid of them. Far too many ended up homeless and crazy, wandering the streets or locked up in an attic or cellar or even dead. She swayed, feeling ill, and then clenched her fists. Oh, she was sick of it. Sick of being gotten rid of. Sick of being discussed. Sick of not being helped. With a thundering roar, hailstones battered the roof and walls around her, hitting wood and stone like a multitude of hammers. They shattered the glass panes of the window in the outer office to spray across the floor like icy diamonds. Clumsily, she knelt to pick up a handful. The door of the Delegate Superior's office swung open, revealing a slender man in his late 50s. He stood there, hands on hips, black eyes under thick black brows fixed on Triss. From the floor she glared at him, hailstones trickling from her fingers. It's rude to stare, she snapped, not over her fury. You were tested for magic? He asked, his clipped voice abrupt. Why did this stranger taunt her? Her family had would have put up with her oddities if only she had been proved to have magic, which might have been turned to the profit of House Chandler. By the most expensive mage in Ninver, if you must know, and he said I haven't a speck of it. Stranger turned and looked at the woman in the yellow habit behind him. Honored Renswing, I've changed my mind. I will be very happy to escort Tristana to Winding Circle Temple in Emelon. He smiled thinly and reached a hand to Triss. I am pleased to meet you, young lady. She ignored the outstretched hand. Getting up, she shook out her skirts. You'll change your mind before long, she retorted. Everyone does. In the storeroom. Carefully, Sandry eyed her rightmost thread. There was the knot she'd tied close to the end. Time to put in something new, she told the waiting darkness with a sigh. She was all out of green now. It had given her good service, glowing with a clearer light than either the gray or the red. She would miss it. Yards of braid lay in a coil from where she continued to work. She fixed her mind on it and on light completely, except for the times when she ate, or slept, or used the stinking barrel that was her chamber pot. Keeping light in her threads took all of her attention, leaving her without time or energy for panic. She groped behind her for her work basket and froze. Muffled voices cried out on the other side of the wall. The girl swallowed hard. Had things gone this bad? Was she going to start imagining people when they were not there? This way, dolts! A voice cried. Don't see anything! Someone, a man, growled in the distance. The light in her braid paled. Don't you dare, she ordered in a whisper. She couldn't keep her mind on it. The glow died. Breathless, she waited in the dark. This was a dream. She wished it would stop. You won't see anything, a crisp, educated voice snapped. Its owner might have been in the same room with her or on the other side of the door. It was spelled for concealment. She clapped her hands over her mouth and started to rock. Oh, this was it, she thought. I've gone mad at last. Something entered the room, a wash of cool air that wasn't really air, more a feeling of water than a breeze. Most of it circled over the empty sack she used for a bed. A lone thread spun out of that cool mass. Drifting across the room, it twined around her shoulders. Now do you see it? The educated voice demanded. I want the locksmith. You've got him, Master Nico. That deep voice also sounded very close. Metal scraped on metal. Air moved. She didn't know that the door was opening until it bumped her. Erda, bless me, what a stink, the deep voice said. Move aside, man, the crisp voice ordered. Its owner, a light-colored shadow, stepped into the room. My child, my name is Niclarin Goldeye. I've been looking for you. He raised a lamp that someone passed him. The light struck her eyes, which had been in the dark for so long. Pain made her scream and cover them. She would see almost nothing for quite some time. End of chapter 1. We have been introduced to our 4 children, 5 main characters, for Nico stays with it the whole time. Woohoo! We got Nico Goldeye, who is a mage with, as you might tell from the last name, a penchant for seeing what others don't see. We have Sandraline Fatoran, who is a nobleman's daughter who was caught up in the panic and riots around an outbreak of, what was it, smallpox? She was hidden, trapped in a storeroom for a very, very long time until she was found. And she trapped light inside a braid that she worked on. We've got Daja, who I've forgotten her family name. We've got Daja, who is a trader. Trader are people think a little like the Romani, ones who travel some by land, some by sea, are often quite hated by those around them, but uh, are great movers of commerce and such. One might imagine trader in the title. I could be wrong with the sort of um, Romani connection. That's just what pops up in my head. We have Briar Moss, at this point, former street rat who's been arrested 3 times and seems to like green things. And then we have Trisana Chandler, who is a cranky, snappish, unwanted, unloved, redhead misanthrope who at this point hates everybody, mostly because she's been screwed over by people so many times. And stuff tends to happen around her when she gets mad, and she gets mad a lot because people are mean to her a lot. So, that's our crew. Summersea in Emelon. Disagreeable misanthrope, yeah. Emelon and Summersea with the sort of the destination they talked about a couple of times. Sandry's great uncle, Duke Vedris IV, the ruler of Emelon, watched the rain fall outside the library windows as first Nico, then Sandry, told the tale of the last 4 months, of Sandry's rescue, healing, and the long trip north. If he had opinions about their tale, they were locked behind his deep-set brown eyes and heavy features. Stocky, broad-shouldered, and commanding, the Duke preferred simple clothes like those he had on. A white lawn shirt, brown wool breeches, a brown wool tunic, and calf-high boots. Only the flash of gold braid at his tunic collar and hems and the signet ring on his left forefinger hinted that he might be wealthy. With his shaved head, hooked nose, and fleshy visage, the Duke looked like one of his own pirate-chasing captains rather than a nobleman whose line had ruled from this castle for 800 years. When they finished, he turned to look at them. Master Nico. Oh God, what voice do I do for him? Master Nico, it was good of you to bring Sandraline to me, particularly at this time of year. Land roads weren't so bad, your grace, replied Nico, stirring his tea. Certainly I couldn't abandon Sandry at that point. I know I should have waited till spring, Uncle, the girl added, but I just couldn't. Hatar, it's a giant graveyard now. I couldn't stay an hour more. She was still pale and thin after her ordeal in the storeroom and weeks of recovery. Dressed in black from head to toe, she had become a small ghost. Nico's suggestion to bring her north to her father's favorite relative had been welcome. Vedra smiled. I understand, my dear. You don't have to apologize. Sandra returned the smile with a small, trembling one of her own. The Duke sighed and rubbed his shaved scalp. You have presented me with a dilemma, however, if you want to stay, he said regretfully. His voice was the most elegant thing about him, smooth and velvet soft, the kind of voice that others I've probably been doing it wrong, the kind of voice that others fell silent to hear. Do you wish to remain? Do you want to head north in the spring? Sundry shook her head, making her twin braids fly. I don't want to go to my Namanese relatives, if you please, uncle. The Duke sat in the window seat. After my lady wife died, I let court functions go. My nobles socialized with one another at their homes. With no hostess, and my children all grown and married, there is no lady here I would ask to take you under her wing. You are welcome to stay as long as you desire, but this castle is a grim place for a young girl. Sandry looked down in her lap. The picture he painted was not appealing. The thought of days in those plain stone halls was a lonely one. The idea of packing and traveling to distant Namorn at any season of the year sounded far worse. She hadn't liked her Namanese kinfolk. Then I have the solution, Nico said cheerfully. I'm surprised you didn't see yourself, your grace. Lady Sandraline can live at Winding Circle Temple. Your nobles send their own children there. She can learn the things that she will need to move in society, and she will get an education worth having. Looking at Sandry, he explained, Winding Circle is known throughout the Pebble Sea as a center of learning and magic. Magic? Sandry thought wistfully. She had thought the magic in the world died with piracy. I'd like to see magic again, she whispered. It is the obvious solution, Nico said to the Duke, who looked at him sharply. She will be close by, as safe behind those walls as she might be here. The two of you can visit wherever you like. Sandraline? Asked the Duke. She smiled tiredly. I don't know, Uncle, but surely it's worth a try? Nidra Island, off the shore of Sotat. It had taken so little time for her to tell the Trader Council of the fate of third ship Kisubo. Out early to get in a fast cargo, it sank in a late winter storm. The 5 judges, 2 land traders, 2 sea traders, and a Mamander, a mage, retired when she finished to discuss her fate. In the judging room, Daja and her rescuer waited for their verdict. Daja was sick with hope. They might let her live among those relatives who were too old or too young for the hard life at sea, at one of the traders' handful of hidden cities. They might give her a new name, send her to a new family. People had gotten second chances like that. Rarely, but it happened. Prepare yourself for the worst, advised Nico, his eyes kind. You know they regard lone survivors as the worst kind of luck. Daja shook her head. It wasn't that she didn't believe him. She simply didn't want to admit that he might be right. The door opened. The members of the council filed in. One, a woman, carried the bulky logbook in which the names of all trader families, vessels, and companies were recorded. Placing it on the judge's table, she opened it, leafing through the pages until she reached the one she sought. Over his or her arms, Daja couldn't tell the sex of the person in those bulky robes and veils, the Mamander carried a staff. Like any trader's staff, it was 5 feet long and made of ebony, a symbol of pride and of a trader's right to protect himself. Brass caps on both ends guarded them from wear and tear. The cap on every other staff in the room bore designs and engravings, bumps, and inlaid wire. On this staff, the cap was unmarked. Seeing it, Daja began to shiver. An unmarked staff meant only one thing. As in the days when our people first carried fire, weaving, and metalwork to the non-traders, the cocks, C-A-Q-S, cocks, cacks, I don't know, said the chief judge, a man. So it is now. Daja Kasubo, lone survivor of disaster, we declare you to be outcast, the worst kind of bad luck. Trengshi. As Trengshi, you must bear this staff always. The commander held the staff out to Daja. The girl stared at it. What was the design on her staff that had sunk with her ship? Dancing monkeys, each grasping the tail of the one before it, with a wire spiral on her cap, to mark her as a brand new member of the crew. This cap had no mark. It was polished mirror bright. As Trangshi, she would never be permitted to add the signs of her own deeds to it. Numb, she gripped the wood and took it from the commander. Your name is marked in the books of our people, the chief judge continued. You are forbidden to speak, touch, or write to traitors. This is to protect them from you. If you do not wish others to catch your bad luck, do the right thing. Stay away from them. The woman with the logbook inked the tip of her brush and began to write, putting down Daja's new status for all traitors to know. You don't have to do this, Nico protested to the judges. You have rights to cleanse her luck, rights to make an orphan newborn to a new family, blameless of everything that has gone before. The commander tucked yellow-gloved hands into wide yellow sleeves. Daja could just barely see eyes behind the thin saffron veil. We made this choice after taking the omens. I placed sacred oil and my own blood on a hot brass dish, and read the signs for her future. Her fate is to be Trangshi. There is nothing you can say to change that, Nick Larangoldai. It's all right, Daja whispered to Nico. They just want to keep my bad luck from ruining everyone else. I understand. Her rescuer glared at the judges and tucked Daja's arm in his. I'm taking her to Winding Circle Temple, he told the council, his dark eyes sparkling with anger. They'll appreciate her, with or without traitor luck. In Sotant. On their first night outside the walls of Hajra, Nico and Briar slept on the ground at a trader camp, the welcome guests of a southbound caravan. The second night they stopped at a wayside inn. Briar was inspecting the room that Nico had taken for him, and considering a raid on the kitchen, when Nico called, Would you come here? I have some shirts I think will fit you. Unsuspecting, the boy went into Nico's room to be brought up short by the sight of a large metal tub filled with hot water. Next to it was a stool with fresh clothes, a scrub sponge, towels, and soap on top. Hop in, Nico said pleasantly. The landlady says you don't sleep in one of her beds until you've bathed. I have to admit I would welcome the change myself. Briar started to back up. That stuff's unhealthy, he informed Nico. Maybe you wouldn't be so bony if you stopped doing this all the time. Strong arms grabbed him. A hostler had been standing behind the half-open door. My thinness has nothing to do with bathing, Nico retorted. Do you undress yourself, or must we do it for you? In the end, it took him and 3 hostlers to give Briar a thorough scrubbing with hot water and soap. The boy's curses, in 5 different languages, left Nico unmoved, though the hostlers were impressed. Never thought a person could do all them things, one of them said to another. I can't. Leastways, not all at once, replied his friend. Briar was silent all the way downstairs. Only the sight of the loaded supper table thawed him. That, just a bit. Soon as we're out of Sotat, me and you part ways, he told Nico. Even the street guard only tortures folks when they've done something. You'll do as you wish, of course, Nico replied, sitting. Beef or chicken? Both. Some of that yellow cheese. Just seems a pity, the man said, handing over the cheese plate. From a pocket in his overrobe, he drew out a handful of wilting plants and put them on the table. These fell out of your clothes. This, he tapped a leafy stem topped with a small lilac flower. This, I believe, is thyme. Don't recognize the others. Though he pretended not to see the plants he'd stolen over the last 2 days, Briar reddened. What's a pity? Magic Circle Temple has the finest gardens and gardeners north of the Pebbled Sea. People who know more than I about plants from all over the world. Nico cut some fish for himself, put it in his mouth, and chewed it carefully without looking at his companion. Once he'd swallowed, he added, It's also one of the two great schools of magic north of the Pebbled Sea. I studied at Lightbridge, the University for Mages, but in some ways I find the mages at Winding Circle more open-minded. Magic, who cares? Briar dug into his food, refusing to talk more until it was in his belly, where no one could take it from him. Plants from all over the world? What must that be like? I believe there's a dedicated Winding Circle who has been able to grow vegetables and fruit, even trees, inside a building, Nico remarked. He wasn't even looking at Briar, but the view of the seashore from the inn's window. Briar just couldn't imagine it. One thing I feel I really must say, Nico put greens on the boy's plate. If I'm forced to bribe hostlers at night to help you bathe, that means less money for food like this as we travel. Briar glared at him. If Nico saw the dirty look, he chose to ignore it. Instead, he returned to eating his dinner. Stick as far as the border, thought the boy. Got a few more meals like this under my belt, so I'd better try this washing. After that, we'll see. Maybe I'll have a look at this Winding Circle place. Maybe I won't. The Pebbled Sea, off Caption. Their first night out, the captain invited Triss and Nico to share the evening meal with the officers. The captain himself was delayed, which gave Triss a chance to examine an odd display on the wall near his map table. It looked to be a collection of knots tied with thick cords, each hanging from a single nail. She counted 2 in green, 1 in yellow, 1 in blue, a 5th that was green with a thin yellow strand in it, a 6th green with blue thread. But to touch them, she changed her mind. They seemed to shimmer, promising a scare to anyone rash enough to handle them. There's my treasure, little girl, the captain had come in. A fortune in winds, that is. Triss pushed her glasses higher on her nose. I don't understand. It's the work of Memanders. Trader mages, he explained. For a small fortune, they'll take a cord and tie up a bit of wind in it for you. See, it's green for north, yellow for east, red for south, blue for west, just like they do in the Living Circle temples. Them's for blowing us all the way out of any tight spots. I got one for northwest and one for northeast. Those'll blow me to safe harbor in Emelon if ever we need it. He ushered Triss into her chair. People can tie up wind in a knot? She asked, eyeing him surely. You're telling me a tale. It's a tale I paid for in gold, the man replied, forking slices of ham onto his plate. Pass Master Nico the bread, there's a good girl. She ate quietly, paying little attention to the men's talk. The knots occupied her mind. How could anyone tie up wind in a knotted cord? Was it an easy thing to learn or hard? She'd never heard of it before. Was it a thing only traders knew? As the first mate filled their cups, she saw that Nico was watching her. Again, those large black eyes gave no clue as to what he thought. Why did the man have to stare so, she wondered. Didn't his mother teach him it was rude? Why don't you ask me anything? She demanded abruptly. If you've something on your mind, tell me. Nico's eyelids fluttered. Was he laughing at her? I can't, he told her, tearing a piece from a sheet of flatbread. Any questions I might have limit how you think, and how the way you act on your thoughts. You see, Triss, just now your mind is unformed, without prejudice. If I present you with the wrong ideas, they might restrict what's inside you. She thought about that for a few moments, ignoring the smiles on the ship's officers. That makes no sense whatsoever, she replied at last. I'd like an answer that makes sense, if you please. Not yet. We have to get to know each other better. That's just his way, youngster, the captain explained, passing a dish of olives to Triss. She muttered her thanks and took some. Master Nico, he's as hard to understand sometimes as any oracle. When the fit's on him, he can talk you so confused you'll forget which bearing is north. It's the university education, Nico told them. It teaches us to chase our tails for an hour before breakfast, just to get the exercise. University? Triss inquired, interested in spite of herself. Some of my cousins are at universities. Which one did you go to? After a moment's hesitation, Nico answered, Lightsbridge, in Kerrang. Trish shoved an olive around her plate. My cousin Amory studies there. He used to be a mage. Maybe you know him? Amory Chandler? I haven't been there in 5 years, was the answer. Chances are that I don't. Yeah, same, similar for my alma mater. He poured fresh pomegranate juice for her, then asked, Would you like to be a mage yourself? How could he keep taunting her this way, suggesting that she could have the one thing she knew that she didn't? No! I hate mages. They confuse people. Jumping up, Triss ran out of the cabin. Alone on deck, she heard thunder growl in the distance. The storm that had threatened all day was breaking. Darting over to the rail, she turned up her face just as the tall waves slapped at the ship. She was immediately soaked, and her anger washed away. Shaking water from her spectacles, she wondered how it was that she felt queasy in her cabin, but perfectly fine now with the deck jumping under her feet. Must be the smell, she decided. The cabin smells like all the cargoes these people have ever carried, and maybe some extra. Here she felt wonderful. Nature roared and thrashed around her, making her rages and tears alike seem meaningless. It was grand to let them go, if only for the time spent out in the weather. Looking at the choppy seas before her, she noticed dim shadows cast on the white-capped water. Where'd the light come from? Even the torches wouldn't burn in this. Turning, she saw nothing at eye level, but something bright drew her attention up the length of the main mast. There, at the top, dim light balanced on the wood. Had to be Runag's fire, the ghostly flame that Seaman believed was the lamp of the water god, leading Runag to bless good ships or to sink bad ones. Shimmering, the light reached out an arm along the length of the topmost yard till she could see a glowing cross high overhead. A globe of fire leaped to another mast, clinging to its top. Triss laughed gleefully at the wonder before her. As if it were a living thing drawn to the sound, the light trickled down both masts in glowing streaks, abandoning the upper reaches of the masts. Once it was close to the deck, it turned to balls the size of her head and jumped free. Unthinkingly, Triss held out both hands, palms up, and caught the globes. Her skin prickled. Each hair on her head rose. Her wool shawl gave off sparks. Then Runag's fire went out, leaving her to be just plain Triss again, with her hair that frizzed even worse now, standing on end. She pawed at it in vain, trying to brush it flat before anyone came and saw. A hand thrust a comb in front of her nose. Turning, she glared at Nico. I suppose you were watching? You told me yourself that's what I always do, he reminded her. And in a sense, you were right. I am always watching. But not for the reasons that you appear to expect. Do you see a monster like everyone else does? She demanded, struggling to yank the comb through her bristling hair. Am I someone who wants to just be locked away? Coming over, he put a hand on her shoulder. I see a young girl who's been very badly treated. Try as she might, Triss could hear no pity in his voice. She had, she might have struck him. Anything that Winding Circle has to offer will be an improvement on what you've had so far. She thrust the comb into his hands and broke out of his light hold. I need my brush, she informed him, and went below. Inside her cabin, she sank down on the pile of her luggage, trembling. She knew it was stupid to hope that he was right. Her hopes always got destroyed, but she couldn't help it. Maybe Runag's fire was a sign that she was right to hope. End of chapter 2. One more? One more. Oh, now they finally actually come to Winding Circle. At Winding Circle Temple in Emelon. Okay, I think we can officially take Grumpy Platypus. Make him happy Platypus. Because we're telling stories. Platypus? Platypus. He's so grown up. I want Terry, though. I want the dog. Or I want the cat. You want to come? Yes, kitty. There we go. That'll work. Kitty cat. Kitty cat. At Winding Circle Temple in Emelon. Sandry toyed with her fork, bored almost to tears. She wished that the servers would serve. If they did... Yes! Yes, yes! Yes, yes! Platypus! Platypus! Platypus and kitty. If the servers served, the other well-born maidens at her table would refuse to chatter with full mouths, and her aching ears would get a rest. Wasn't as if they ever said much that was of interest. All they spoke of were fashions and marriages. By now, after nearly 8 weeks of their companionship, Sandra was sure that she was interested in neither. All around her, the dining hall thundered. Meals here were booming chaos, punctuated by food. When quiet fell, starting near the door and spreading out, it came slowly. "Oh, no, they let just anyone in here, don't they?" Lisa Fenadlin whispered to a friend. Sandra looked in the direction of Lisa's well-bred glare. A girl stood near the door, cup, platter, and eating utensils clutched to her chest. In her thigh-length tunic and leggings, both an eye-smarting shade of red, she could only be a trader. She was big for a young girl, broad-shouldered and thick-waisted. Her skin was the color of the new fashionable drink called chocolate. She wore her black hair in a number of short braids. Her lips were locked tight as if to keep them from trembling. "Hey, trader," a boy demanded, "who'd you rob today?" "Whose baby did you kill a magic to wind for your sails?" called someone else. "Find a seat," ordered the delegate who ran the dining hall, her voice sharp. "No one can serve until you have a place." Everywhere, people spread their legs or moved apart on benches or placed books or packs beside them. They didn't want a despised traitor at their table. Sandra got to her feet. Lisa's voice cut through her burning anger. "Lady Sandraline, what are you doing?" Sandra ignored the other girl and walked briskly across the room. The traitor was glaring at everyone, her chin up, the dark skin of her cheeks burning red. Only when the smaller girl halted before her did she look down. "My name's Sandry. Please join me at my table." Seeing the other girl blink, guessing that she hadn't understood, Sandry tucked her hand under the newcomer's elbow and tugged her in the right direction. For a moment she thought that the traitor might refuse. She didn't budge. Then she relaxed. "All right, cock," she muttered in traitor talk. "Nobody will thank you for this." Should probably pronounce it cack, shouldn't I? She let Sandry pull her between the rows of tables. "If thanks was what I wanted," Sandry replied in the same language, "I would be sad indeed. Since I don't want it, I won't miss it." The black girl stiffened. Finally she said, "Your accent is terrible." Sandry beamed up at her. "Yes, I know." "We don't want her with us," protested Lisa when they reached the noble's table. Sandry looked down her button nose at the other girl. "She is my guest," she said flatly. "What's your name?" she asked in traitor talk. Daja nearly refused. When she saw anger on the faces of the other girls, she grinned instead, white teeth flashing against dark skin. "Daja Kasubo." "Lady Daja is my guest," Sandra told Liesa. A girl nearby muttered, "If that's a lady, I'm a cat." Reaching out, Sandra lifted the pitcher of milk from the table. Cradling it in both hands, she walked over to the mutterer. "I am Sandraline Fatorin, daughter of Count Matin of Fatorin and his countess, Ameliane Falandric. I am the great niece of his grace, Duke Vedris of this realm of Emelon, and cousin of her Imperial Highness, Empress Bernanine of the Namorn Empire. You are Esmel A. Pragan, daughter of Baron Witten N. Pragan, and has Lady Coledia of House Wheelwright, a merchant house. If I tell you my friend is a lady, then you—" Carefully she poured milk into Esmel's plate. "You had best start lapping, kitty." She set the pitcher down and returned to her chair. Daja was still on her feet. You didn't know any good with that, she said in trader talk. Not me, not you, not even them. I don't care, the sentry spoke in common so that everyone understood. My papa said that nobility has no right to be rude. We are supposed to know better. She plumped her bottom onto her chair and looked at Daja. Are you going to sit? She asked. Big as you are, you look like you can't afford to skip meals. The first time since the sinking of the third ship Kasuba, Daja smiled. Gingerly, she sat. I hope other nobles aren't like you. She had a lilt in her speech when she spoke in common. Don't think I could stand the excitement. Novices began to carry bowls and platters to the tables. Any talk about what had just taken place was drowned out in the rattle of wood and metal. Wish I had read ahead on that one, because just her whole little, if I say she's a lady, then you're a kitty. Start lapping. Like that whole thing, just the rattling off of the names. I wish I hadn't stumbled over it, but I do love it. Also, like I knew I was wrong as I was saying that the traders were like the Romani. I know that's wrong. I just I don't know kind of what culture or cultures they're pulled from. And I have been wrong about guessing before. Tristana, listen to me. I have your best interests at heart. The blue-robed dedicate stood over her, blocking the light. These odd ways of yours make you no friends with the other girls. Was it entirely wrong? Okay. I'm wondering if they're like a blend. I wonder if they're a blend, because like anyway. Uh these odd ways of yours make you no friends with the other girls. They're outside enjoying the splendid weather. You should be too. If you were to make anything of yourself, you need friendships with girls who will help you to meet the right kind of people. Desert Bedouins, that makes more sense. Yes. Does she ever shut up? Wondered the redhead as she turned a page in her book. Are you listening? Dedicate Staghorn took the girl by the arm and pulled her up until she was sitting instead of lying on her cot. Stop slouching. Put that book down. Triss attempted to yank out of the woman's hold without success. She looked up into Staghorn's face with eyes that glinted like gray ice behind her spectacles. Let go, she said quietly. This is for your benefit, the Dedicate told her. Whatever caused your parents to give you to the Living Circle temples, they didn't want me, so shut up, Triss thought miserably, pale skin crimson with humiliation. Shut up, shut up, shut up! Across the room, shutters banged as they closed, then flapped open. Staghorn jumped and released the girl's arm. Now listen. You've been in this dormitory for 6 weeks, and you act as if you are royalty, which you are not. Staghorn jerked as a door slammed. You need to be nicer to people. Triss couldn't answer. Her head was starting to ache, and her stomach lurched unpleasantly. Pressure had built in her ears until she thought they might burst. The room pitched before her eyes. This was very different from being just angry. You wanted me to get out? She gasped, standing up. I'm going. Running to the door, she yanked it open. You might want to come too. The air popped. Staghorn lurched. If you've made me ill. A pitcher marched off the bedside table and shattered on the floor. The metal and enamel image of Yelena, goddess of water, dropped from a shelf on which it sat. In the corner, a freestanding closet fell over. Staghorn ran for the door that Triss still held for her. Quake! Screamed the Dedicat. It's a quake! She noticed, muttered Triss, following her outside. The ground stilled almost immediately, but Winding Circle's residents stayed outside for a while, in case there were any more shakes. Many were fearful. It was the first good-sized tremor in over a year. Was it a warning of a larger quake to come? Triss yawned. Her sickness gone with the shaking crown, she thought the other's fear was silly. Except for broken crockery and the ruined pine wardrobe, there was little damage. Not enough for the fuss that was being made of it, in her opinion. She was also sure that there wouldn't be a bigger shake that day, though she couldn't have known. She couldn't have said how she knew. Looking around, she saw that Staghorn was huddled with two other dedicates who supervised the main girls' dormitory, talking rapidly and watching Triss. Straining her ears, the redhead heard, "Knew it was coming!" That was enough. She'd heard people say such things about her dozens of times before. Next would have come, "We/I don't want her living here." Book in hand, Triss walked towards the rear of the garden. Out of sight of the dedicate, she climbed over the short fence and escaped to Winding Circle's biggest library. In the girls' main dormitory, 2 weeks after her first meal with Sandry, Daja decided to take a late evening walk before the dedicates called everyone inside for the night. She walked a great deal these days, feeling trapped inside Winding Circle's 12-foot thick walls. She wished she were aboard a sturdy little ship bound southwest, through the long strait and the bright bite of fire, into the vast stretch of the endless ocean. In recent years, word had come of islands in the endless, filled with strange animals and copper-skinned natives. She would like to see them. She did not like to see her staff leaning against the wall between bed and nightstand. Its brass cap gleamed like gold, throwing back her distorted reflection. She was sick of it and everything it represented. Leaving it there, she went outside. The sun was below the walls that circled the temple community, leaving shadows to gather inside. She took her bearings. There was the tower the locals called the Hub, dead center and winding circle, pointing to a clear sky. Dasha set out, picking her way through the multitude of small gardens that were fitted between every building inside the walls. Though she was trying to think of other things, she couldn't make herself forget that Winding Circle's smithies were just a short walk away. For a moment she thought she felt the heat of forge fires on her skin and smelled the tang of iron and brass. It had always been an embarrassment to her family, her interest in metalwork. To be interested in it still, while they slept under the waves, seemed disloyal. She was trying so hard not to think of the smithies that she didn't know she had company, till a hoarse voice growled, "Grab the stinking traitor!" Dodge spun, paying attention now, but too late. Rough arms grabbed her and dragged her between a gardener's shed and one of the laundries. More hands tried to cover her mouth. She yanked her head away and kicked out with her feet. She hit something hard, and a voice, boys, she thought, yelped. "Kick!" she snarled, furious as much with herself as with them. How could she have been so careless? Too afraid for a real fight? "Shut her up!" someone urged a girl. She was another resident of the dormitory where Daja slept. "If they hear—" "Nobody wants you here, traitor," panted the one who had grabbed her from behind. Daja flailed, trying to yank herself free. "You stink up our air." She kicked something else, something soft. Somebody began to vomit. Light flared brighter than even sunlight in these shadows. Nico stood in the opening between the buildings and the road, his upraised hand glowing. He had a companion, the assured, worldly woman who was the dedicate superior in charge of Winding Circle, Moonstream. Daja's attackers, 3 girls and 2 boys, ran. Daja herself stumbled and fell when the boy who had been hanging on to her let go. Hands as dark as her own helped her to her feet. Daja found herself looking into Moonstream's wise brown eyes. "Are you hurt?" the older woman asked. Her voice was clear, low, and kind. "Just my pride," Daja muttered. "It was stupid, and Cax got me. I'd hoped our boarders were more open-minded about traitors. I'm disappointed to find I was so wrong." Now that she was certain Daja was uninjured, Moonstream's voice was dry and emotionless. She tucked her hands into her sleeves and looked up at Nico. "Perhaps the girls' dormitory isn't the best place for Daja. I'd like her to feel that she's safe where she lives." "Discipline, then?" Nika suggested. "No, it's not punishment," he hastened to assure Daja. "It's the name of a much smaller cottage near the Earth Temple." "You'll move there first thing tomorrow," Moonstream said. She laid a cool, dry palm against Daja's cheek. The girl smelled a hint of cinnamon on the delicate skin. "Do you think you'll be bothered tonight?" Daja shook her head. Trouble at night came only as talk. The dedicates who looked after the girls checked the beds too often for any blows to be struck. "Discipline will suit you better, Daja." Nika put an arm around her shoulders. "You'll have your own room, for one. Privacy can be a blessing in itself." Condemned to spend the rest of my life among cacks, the girl thought sadly, returning to the dormitory. There aren't any blessings left for me. As she opened the outer door, she heard Moonstream say, "No, I want to find the ones who did this." The only problem with layering under his bed, as Briar discovered on his third night in the boys' dormitory, was that there are no really secure exits. Back home, no one could have sneaked up on him as the other boys did now, blocking him on two sides of the bed as they dragged him out through the third. In Sotat, he would have been down a tunnel into the mazes of the sewers before they'd blocked his main entrance. He'd been so busy examining the plants he'd stolen that day that he hadn't heard them come up. Gonna deserve my ouches, he thought, gray-green eyes giving no sign of his feelings. Letting a bunch of dung-footed gops nab me. Two of them lifted him, gripping him by the arms. The fatty loudmouth from 3 beds down stood in front of him, hand on one hip. He shoved the first finger of the other hand in Briar's face. "You stole my cloak pin, gallows bait," he cried. "I want it back." Briar knew the pin that was meant. Boyd showed it to everyone the day before. "Me?" demanded the street rat, horrified. "Nick that piece of flesh? There's no pump with his bags as would pay more than a few copper pennies for it." "Liar!" cried his accuser. "It cost me 2 silver crescents." Briar lifted his eyebrows. "Silver, gilt paint, tin, and a glass pearl? Then you was nicked and nicked proper." Two of the other boys upended the small clothes chest at the foot of the bed, spilling its contents on the floor. Someone else dragged everything out of Briar's den and scrabbled through the green bits that Briar had just been examining. "Look at this," he said, laughing. "Did someone tell you dead plants are valuable, street scum?" "Here's wickedness." One of the pair searching his clothes chest held up 2 of the knives that Briar had picked up on his journey to Winding Circle. "Planning to murder us in our sleep and rob us all?" The leader's finger stabbed forward, poking Briar rudely in the nose. Quick as a flash, Briar lunged forward and bit down on the accusing finger. His victim screamed as he hung on. The pair holding him twisted his arms up behind his back. Briar got rid of one, kicking his knee till the boy collapsed. Releasing the leader's finger, Briar smashed the other boy hanging onto him with the back of his skull. His victim fell back, his nose bleeding. Dropping, Briar rolled away from the boys, one hand going to an ankle sheath, the other going to one in an armpit. Lurching to his feet, he showed them his blades. "Back up, bleeders, let you want more mouth than you got." Softness. Nyeh. Softness, like clouds, wrapped around his arms. Did I mention I also like, I like all of them. There's literally none of these that I don't like. But I also really like Briar. Softness, like clouds, wrapped around his arms, pinning them to his sides. He couldn't see it, but he felt it as it flowed down his legs. When it tightened, it snapped his feet together, knocking him off balance. He fought it as he dropped, without result. A foot rolled him over. Quieted, seeing who stood over him. A pair of dedicates. Both wore the yellow habit of the air temple which ran the dormitories, but the hem of the woman's robe was lined in black. "I knew what would happen when they let that gutter snipe in," the male dedicate hauled Briar up by his shirt. "You're out of this dormitory. If I have my way, you're out of Winding Circle altogether." "What have you done to me?" Briar snarled as the woman tried to pry his knives from his fingers. She smiled. "Don't like the shackles of air, lad?" she asked. "Never saw this kind of magic before?" Briar went still. "Magic? But that's fakery," he thought, shocked. Then he looked down at his body. Fakery, he couldn't see, had glued his legs together and his arms to his side. When the woman tugged again, he released his knives. Time to fight was over. "He stole my cloak pin!" cried his original accuser. "It cost me 3 silver astrals!" His friends noticed the change in price. They kept quiet about it. Briar sighed. "I told you I wouldn't lower myself. There's the bleeder that nicked it." He nodded towards the boy that had made fun of his plants. "It's under his pillow." The boy he'd accused flinched. 2 boys went to his bed and lifted his pillow. There was the stolen pin, as well as a few small treasures belonging to the other boys. He put them there," cried the real thief. "He knew that we were on his trail, and he put him on my bed." "Will you swear that before a truth-sayer?" asked the female dedicate. One of the best is here visiting honored Moonstream. I'd love to see the spells he uses." The thief swallowed hard and shook his head. Whatever else, I want him out of here, the man holding Briar snapped. He shook the boy hard. Knives have no place in a boy's dormitory. Depends on the dormitory, muttered Briar. The invisible bounds on his legs vanished, and the two delegates steered him roughly towards the door. Tris Chandler leaned on the windowsill in winding circles administration building, glaring at the clouds. Through the closed door of the Delegate Superior's office, she heard Staghorn's whine. The delegate wanted her out of the girls' dormitory. Here I go again, Tris thought angrily. We don't want you. Move along. Storm clouds rolled by, gathering heavy with rain and thunder. Lightning danced in them, growing as it skipped from curve to curve, gaining strength with each bounce. She could almost smell its pale, cold scent. The hairs on her arms prickled with its closeness. Crack! The bolt struck 10 feet away, crisping a sapling tree. The girl's ears rang. Every hair on her head stood upright. In the office, Staghorn shrieked in terror. Tris smiled. Are you all right, Tris? A light, familiar male voice asked loudly. You were looking right at it. Trying to get her wiry curls to flatten, Tris ignored Nico. It's curious to see lightning hit a small tree where there are tall ones. Or buildings at hand, he added now. Tris pushed her spectacles higher on her long nose and turned to glare at her former traveling companion. She had to lean back to do it. He was a foot and a half taller than her own 4 feet 4 inches. What have buildings and trees to do with it? She demanded. Lightning strikes what's nearest the clouds, he replied. Does it strike the hub? She asked, looking at the highest tower next to the administration. It has, but the hub's protected. There's a rod on the clock tower attached to a wire that runs into the ground. The lightning is drawn to the rod first, and the wire takes its fire into the soil where it dies. Except, as it seems, on a day like today, when the lightning was invited to strike elsewhere. Is that Nico, I hear? Honored Moonstream opened her door and looked out. Her plum dark lips smiled a welcome. Her brown eyes sparkled. Come in here. I need you. Tris turned back to the window. A hand, warm, solid, almost comforting, rested on her shoulder. Before she could shrug off both it and the comfort, Nico said, Mages have a very wise rule. Before all else, do no harm. Before she could think of a reply, Nico entered the Delegate Superior's office and closed the door. The outer door banged. 2 more guests rushed in. One was a pale, sweating delegate in the blue habit of the Water Temple. Tris knew she was in charge of the Pearl Cup, where the wealthy girls lived. Her companion was Tris's own age. Sit there, away from the window, the delegate told her charge. I don't want lightning to hit you until after you're not my problem anymore. My lady, God bless us, that was close. She thrust her companion onto a bench against the wall, then swept into the office without knocking. Honored Moonstream, I've had enough, she cried, and slammed the door. Did you see that lightning? The new girl was excited, more than scared. My hair stood on end. I thought it was going to take flight. If the delegate's words had upset her, it didn't show. I've never been so close to it. Tris looked the stranger over. A merchant at heart, like the rest of her family, she knew that the other girl's outfit, a sleeveless black overdress with tightly fitted bodice and jet buttons, a white lawn undergown with puffy sleeves, was costly. Every inch of the newcomer, from the sheer black veil over her light brown braids to the gold embroidery on neat kid slippers, proclaimed old blood and old money. Without a word, Tris turned back to the window. This noble would learn her mistake soon enough. She would be ashamed to remember she had spoken to a merchant girl. It's only lightning, she replied. The girl came over. Oh, look, the poor tree got fried. She leaned through the casement eagerly. The band that secured her veil slipped, making the black silk puff on top of her hair. Tris smiled wryly. The stranger turned her head. Sky-blue eyes met her gray ones. Instantly, the other girl's hand went to her veil. They never stay on straight. She yanked it off. And no mirror to fix it with. I hate veils anyway. The office door opened. Moonstream walked out, followed by the delegates who had brought the girls there. You two are not fitting into the dormitories, the honored delegates The other delegate smiled, inviting them to share her amusement. I am told that, if you were to stay, the other girls will be demoralized. Very well. Today you move to Discipline Cottage. It's by the north gate. I think you'll both do better there. She looked at the delegates. Pack their things and send them to Discipline. Nico, will you escort Lady Sunderland and Tristana to their new home? The man stepped out of the office. He looked the girls over, smoothing his mustache. Never thought they would end up at Discipline. Thought the school would be enough once they settled down. He spoke softly, as if he were thinking aloud. Moonstream sighed. Nico. I tried to settle. Honestly, I did. Sandry's bright eyes were fixed on Nico. Would I do better at this other place? The delegate in charge of her dormitory sniffed disdainfully. I don't want to settle in, muttered Triss. Nico grinned at the delegate superior. It's my pleasure to take them to Discipline, he said. End of chapter 3. All right, no, that's it. That's it. We're going to end on that one. And we'll pick this up again next Friday, perhaps. At which point, the rest of the children will finish meeting each other. Now that all 4 of them, Sandry, Daja, Triss, and Briar, have been moved to Discipline Cottage, at which point we will also meet 2 more of the very best people in books, who are named Lark and Rosethorn. And, yeah, there are cottagecore lesbians that we will love for the rest of our lives. So there we go. I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope that you join me again next Thursday, 7:30, for the next 3 or 4 chapters of this, however much we get through. That time will be a little bit smoother as we start out, because we won't start out with 15 minutes of silence. And, yeah. Have a great night. Enjoy your time. Bye.